Hi to How It Works with Holger. Welcome to yet another Web Design with TMS WEB Core episode. Today I would like to show you how you can build an image gallery from scratch. It sounds pretty dry, but let me show you the end result of the first stage. We're going to look at different concepts at first before we build the actual image gallery. First, we'll start with Flexboxes. Then we're going to use the grid model from Bootstrap. And third, we're going to use something more from Bootstrap to get rid of all the downsides that we've encountered so far. Let me show you the downsides of these image galleries at first. For example, these two images look quite nice, but as soon as I start resizing, they get smaller, 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 up to the point where you can't see the image anymore, right? So there's no responsive behavior at all. Whereas down here, the second try has responsive behavior. 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. However, the images have different height. So we need to do something about that. And that's exactly the fourth approach, which is more or less perfect, where we have like 4 pictures. And as soon as I scroll farther to the left, I have 3 in a row. The fourth one jumps down. And now I have 4. 2, 2, and then mobile view. And the size or the height of the images always stayed the same. They always align well. And that's the aim, to learn about how you can get there. Also, if I hover over these different images, I can see a little shadow. So that will be the first step to look at the different concepts, how you can build these things. With this, we'll introduce Flexbox, grids, cards, and also absolute and relative positioning. Finally, and that's the last step, we're going to use a data source to actually retrieve actual images. And this is the final example right here. I can click on Fetch Images. And here's the finished image gallery with pictures from Pexels. This is a curated or the curated endpoint from Pexels that actually shows me selected images from their repertoire. And again, I have 4 images in a row. I can hover over them. I can scroll down. And let's say my screen is not as big. It resizes to 2 by 2. I'll also show you a couple of tricks how you can affect the height of the images, how many images you have in a row, and of course, other stuff like changing the colors on these captions, the font of the captions, and so on. Everything is configurable, and after watching this tutorial, you'll be able to create your own image galleries of this kind. One final remark, the hover effect is not the only thing we do. We can actually click on the image, and then we're going to the Pexels page, get to the image, can download it in different resolutions, and I also get other pictures of this kind. So this is fully integrated more or less into the Pexels API, so to speak, only one endpoint, of course. Maybe in the future I'll add an edit box on the top with a button, and you can search for certain images, but that's the next step. But honestly, I'm not trying to rebuild something that's already here, because we have the Pexels page, of course. However, you might have yourself a web service that delivers images. So this tutorial gives you the tool set, how you can present them using different Bootstrap tools like the grid, cards. It also shows you how you can create a layout that consists only of images. Hey, without further ado, let's jump right in. As always, I'm going to use Visual Studio Code for the web design part, and in a later stage, we're going to copy paste it into the Red Studio IDE with TMS WEB Core, or alternatively, of course, you can stay in Visual Studio Code and use TMS WEB Core for Visual Studio Code, whatever you prefer. Both approaches work just fine. However, I kind of like the approach to noodle around with my web designs using the live server. I've shown this in a previous video. The live server is an extension that I really recommend to have. You can create your document. Let's say it's index.html. I press exclamation mark and enter, and then I can create the title, Holger's image gallery, for example. And then inside of the body, I type hello world. And at this point, I can either right-click here and say Open with Live Server, or click down here to go live, and that will open my web browser on this machine, and I have Hello World. Of course, this is still without any Bootstrap. We go to Get Bootstrap. We have to do this manually because we don't have TMS WEB Core. We have to add the CDN to our document. So right here, paste, and then we add the script. This, if you wonder why I don't use Copilot, Copilot never really adds the version that I want. It's kind of strange. It's very capable with many things, but if you tell it to add Bootstrap, it doesn't work that good. It never catches the right one. So that's a step that you have to do manually. You can also create your own gist, for example, on GitHub and insert those two references from there. But to be honest with you, it changes frequently. Like, I recorded 3 videos in the first couple of months, and these references always change. It was like 531, 532, and now it's 533. So it changes rapidly. So saving, and now if I go back to localhost, not 8,000, 50, 5500, I get the server that I started previously. This is interesting. So if you have 2 Visual Studio codes open, and I'll leave this in the video recording and I don't cut it out. If you have 2 Visual Studio codes open, which I have on the different display, the live server is actually so smart that it creates a different port for your live server. So this one actually is now 5501. So this is our Hello World right here. You can always just close the browser, stop the server, and launch it again, of course, if you're uncertain which URL to use. But you always see it down here in the status bar which server is available. The font now has changed to the Bootstrap font, and you can clearly see this if we now add a container with a padding of 5 and then move our Hello World up here. I hold the Option key or Alt key, and that way I can move the current line, and I save, and there we go, Hello World. So that really works nicely. It's P-5, that's why it's not moving down. There we go. That way we get a nice distance to the top and the left of the page. Let's look at the first idea with regards to the image gallery. CSS or web programming has flexboxes, and flexboxes are a great means to align things next to each other. And Bootstrap allows us to use flexboxes very, very easily. So this is going to be the first try how to build it. And I should have left the container right here. What we're going to do, we're going to build a div that uses the flex classes. So we can do dflex and then gap5. What this does is everything I put in there, for example, if I define another flex, for example, I say f bold, fs3 or fw bold, I should say, and then hello1. And then I do another one with hello2. Save. You can see that these are aligned next to each other and they have a gap of 5. So if I were to make a gap of 2, these come closer together. Remember, with Bootstrap, by default, Bootstrap only has 1 to 5, so 5 is the biggest gap. If you go to the developer console, this should also be aligned on the bottom, which you can do here with the 3 buttons and align it to the bottom. That way you can do much nicer web design without affecting your responsive behavior of the page. So we go here, and now this way we see the padding in green. We see the container, because the container makes certain that the orange part isn't being used. And then we have the Flexbox, the first part and the second part. And if we go to the source code right here and expand this a little bit here, this div, we also get this tiny little, it's tiny here. It's most likely also tiny on your screen. It says flex right here. And if I click that, I get basically what Chrome does, it shows me where the flex boxes are. And I can see that this is the whole space that is available to me, and this is Flexbox number 1, and this is Flexbox number 2, and this is the gap. So if I make the gap smaller, that rectangle will get smaller, as you can see right there. And you can add as many as you want. So, for example, if I add more and save, it is all staying in line, so to speak, no matter how many I add. So if you really want to use a Flexbox because the height and all these kind of things are not important to you, you can do that pretty easily by, let's duplicate these. By the way, you can do this with Shift, Alt, and then just pressing down. So you have a lot of the same gray box, and then you can add flex wrap to the class, not dwrap, it's flex wrap. And you save, and then it wraps automatically as much space as is available. So if I make this wider, see, this gives me pretty much good control. And if you're wondering, like, this hello text and these things, that don't really give me a good idea how to use it for an image gallery. So what you can do, you can use P-5, for example, and that's adds padding around your text right here. So, and with that, if you duplicate it again, you see how an image gallery should behave, right? That's pretty good. With Bootstrap, that is the easiest way to get some sort of grid or align things. You know, you have control over the gap. If you make the gap wider, like this, of course, you lose the ability to position something. So, and you see, it is fully responsive this way, right? And because we have a hard-coded height here, this is pretty good. For example, if you have a profile page where you have a list of users with their pictures, portrait pictures, this might be ideal. But for an image gallery, as you'll see pretty quickly when I show the example, this is not the ideal solution. So let's use images. Let's remove this. And let's actually use images in here. And what we can do, nothing of the sort what Copilot is suggesting here. So we're going to use a width of 25. That means that we want to use 25% of the total width of the container with a margin on the top of 5. That is the distance to the top. And then position relative is something I need later on. I'll explain it when it comes to that. And with that, so let's insert an image like this. So we need a source. And for that, I have prepared a couple of images. Just drag them in here. They're available in the GitHub project that's available for this tutorial. And these images are like a bird, a bluebird, a frog, and a lizard. And the key thing to remember is if you create this, the lizard and the bird have the same kind of dimension, 640 times 960, 640 times 960. And the bluebird is 563 times 1,000. And this is also times 1,000. So the aspect ratio of these images is different, and that's what is key. So you could create an image gallery, of course, where you say that your backend or you prepare your images that they're all the same size. But this solution actually allows you to use images which do not have the same size. This is a huge advantage. You don't have to restrict yourself to certain images. So let's start with the lizard. So source dash lizard.jpg, it's a lizard. And if we save this, we get a huge lizard right here. Okay, let me get rid of the Flexbox here. So this is the lizard without any restrictions whatsoever, right? So we make this image fluid. So we add the class image fluid that is Bootstrap specific. And then it is aligned inside of the container, meaning 25% of the total width that is available to us. And if you look at that, you can actually see that this is more or less 25% of the whole thing, right? Perfect. And you also see the margin of 5 here. This is the margin of 5. If I had taken 3, that margin would get smaller. So with 5, position relative does not have any effect right now. It just means that all the children that we define inside of this div will be able to define themselves with position that is defined relative to this. So for example, if I wanted to position a caption down here, it has to be relative to the image. And that's why we define the container of the image as relative, so that the position of the caption can be given in absolute coordinates. You'll see it. It's really, really easy. Just remember, if you want to specify coordinates on something, the parent element has to be relative. And that is actually the next step to get the caption in there. So we go below the image here, and we stay in the container that has the position relative. And you see Copilot is already making assumptions right here that we want to position something inside of the container using absolute, because there's relative here, right? That thing is smart. So right underneath the image, we can now start to build the caption. But I want to have it in line with this image right here. That's a little bit tricky sometimes in Visual Studio Code. So we define a div with the class of position absolute. As I said, we want to position something in there, and it's supposed to take the full width of the picture. That's why we take width 100. Text is supposed to be white. The text is supposed to be centered. We want to position it at 0 from the bottom, meaning at the bottom, and from the left, which is start. Start is left, end is right. Position 0. And the background color we want to pick, and this is preference. Let's start with something red. That's BG Danger. And with Bootstrap, sometimes the amount of classes that you use can be a lot. And that might be the case then for you to build your separate class. For example, this would be a good candidate for a caption class, that you would use caption instead of listing all the different classes. And the background opacity is 25%. And then we want to have a padding of 3, and we want to have a rounded bottom of 5. So with that, we have our definition complete. So we say div dot position absolute, typo here, 100% of the width, white text, centered, and the position is on the bottom, on the left, and because it's centered and takes up the full width, this is literally the bottom to the right bottom of the picture, and the height is determined by the height of the text plus a padding of 3 to all sides. So this should work pretty good with tab. I don't know why this isn't helping us or helping me to create the class. See, other IDEs aren't perfect either. So here in this case, Copilot had to help me by looking at the next line, and this is exactly what I want to do. In here, I have to type the caption now, and I could just type the text, lizard in the sun, but that itself has to go on a span, so we can add a little bit more. So we say span class, and then here we say, again, white text, bigger font, lighter, opacity 100, because the text is supposed to be 100% and the background is to be a little bit translucent, like this. And then we can say lizard in the sun. Perfect. With that, we can close this div, and we can also close this div. Oh, we should be good, because this div is already closed, so this should be it. Perfect. Let's look at our live preview. There we go. And we already see the downside that if it gets too small, that it resizes too much. You know, it's nice, it works, you know, it does what it's supposed to be. And with the gap and everything, if we now were to insert another image, which is doable pretty easily. And of course, this is what we would generate with TMS WEB Core dynamically. You know, we have a list of image files, and then we generate this HTML content dynamically to create our image library. So lizard, and then we do, for example, the bird. And then we say alt bird, image fluid, that's gonna stay. And with that, we also gonna do the bird sitting on the floor. For example, save. And then we have 2 images, and you already see the problem, how small it gets. But that's just that. I also have one tiny little thing here. The image isn't rounded yet, but I rounded the edges here. So what I forgot is here, the image fluid, I can say rounded 5. And I can do the same here, rounded 5. And this gives me the nice round edges around the images. So you don't actually have to recalculate the images per se. You just tell your HTML or the Bootstrap classes to round those images. And that gives already a really attractive looking design. But the problem is if you make it smaller, 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 at some point it gets too small. And it should be resilient against that. There is no definition of any responsive classes. And that's what we're going to look at next with a second solution using the Bootstrap grid. We've all learned from experience the first try is never going to be the one that we use in the end, or seldom at least. So let's get rid of this one and also this one. We just need the container. And this time we're going to take a different approach, which is grids. And I have to go here on my cheat sheet, because obviously I prepared everything. It's not like I can do these things with the design without preparing. So the row is one of the major classes in Bootstrap. You have rows and columns. And what you can do is you can then define columns like this. You can say col 12. That is a column that takes up the whole row. So anything that is in here, hello world, is going to take up the whole width of the container, okay? So if we look at this with a little bit here, you see that Bootstrap creates for us the flex boxes and everything by just doing this right here. And if we make this bigger, Bootstrap uses media queries to make it bigger and resize everything. With one column, that's actually quite easy, right? But you want this display with one column really only when you watch it on a mobile device like this. Otherwise, you want more information, not just show one image, right? So what you can do then is you can say, okay, we have 12 columns on a mobile device. We want to have 6, so that means 2 images on the page from Medium. You want to have 4 columns for 1 image on large devices. That means a total 12 divided by 4 is 3. And then if it's an XL device, you want to have 3 columns for this image. That means 12 divided by 3 is 4 columns in total. Okay, and with that, you get different sizes for this. So in this moment, it's only 1, as you can see. But if I make it bigger, it's 2. See? 1 image, another image. Now if I make it bigger, it's 3. 1, 2, 3. And if I make it even bigger, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is responsive design using the grid columns in Bootstrap. There's also a grid row that allows you to specify the number of columns. Totally different approach. So it's not based on the 12. You literally say, like, I want 1 column on this size, 2 on this, 3 on this. But we're just going to focus on the column approach here. As I said many, many times before, Bootstrap is a very, very complex framework that has many, many opportunities what you can do. So this is really just one of the ways to do things. So with that, we've already taken a great step, because now we can proceed with the same code that we had before, because the content of the column more or less needs to be the same, right? And that's exactly what I can do. So I copy, paste what we had before, so we don't have to start from scratch for our image. So in here, I'm now going to make it a little bit wider so you can see better. I'm going to paste in our lizard again. And there we go. The lizard now takes up on column. And if I move it bigger, right here, let me see. Now I have 2, 3, and 4. So this works much, much better than before. So if I add now my second image, the row is, I can add everything to a row. That's the nice thing, because it automatically wraps. So that's the only thing I really need to do. I can add as many pictures as I would like. So I can add another picture here. So this is the row, so this is the column. So I add another column in here, save. Nothing changes on this view on first sight, but if I make it bigger, there's the second bird, because now I have a grid with 2. And see, that's another column. And here, let's insert the frog. This is where the problems will start. I think I have one div too many in here. Perfect. That's it. And now if I resize it, look what happens. It really resizes nicely. It's responsive, right? So here, and if I make it smaller, you have 2, 2, 2, 2. But the height of the images is a problem. If you want all 4 images next to each other like this, these are smaller than these 2. They're not as high. And I've tried many approaches with this. The key to it is that you have to basically use a card layout. That's how Bootstrap wants us to use. Of course, you could write custom CSS to get the same kind of thing what Bootstrap does, but why not use a Bootstrap class that helps us with this? And that's literally the last approach that I have to show you. And it's not that much more difficult. So we start again with an empty container. They're all gone. Boom. That's it. And in this container, I'm going to immediately insert all the different variations. This time, I'm going to use a grid with cards. And these, if I save this, this gives us exactly what we would like to see, right? The images, and then we have the different cards. So what is the difference here? Let us look at the source code in detail first. So we have a row, and inside of this row, I define columns, but I do not set a width for the column. That's the key point here. The width is determined by the number of columns that are inside of a row. And this, as I previously mentioned, this is not based on the number 12. This literally determines how many columns do you want to have in a row. So in this case, we have with row, we say we want a new row, but with row calls 1, we say 1 column. So what you see right here on the right, that is the state for the small devices that you only have 1 column, which is 1 image, right? And as soon as we get to the medium device breakpoint, we want 2. As soon as we go to the large, 3, and XL, 4. And this is exactly what happens. We make it bigger, so we're still 1. Now we have the breakpoint for the medium, that's 2. And now at some point the breakpoint for the large device, we have 3 images. And then we have 4 images. At this point you might say, Holger, you said like the whole reason why you did this is that the images have different height. Yes, and we need custom CSS for this. That's the only thing I didn't say. So we create styles.css, a style sheet. And what we need in there, we need to override the image, the default image. So card, image, top, and that is height, the height for the image. This is where you specify the maximum height, or not the maximum, I should say. That is the height we set. And here's the key, object fit cover. That makes the image appear the way we want it. And as soon as I save this, nothing happens, just flickers, because we also have to reference this. So we go here and we say link, style sheet, style CSS. Yeah, it looks almost right, Copilot. We also need to call it dot like this. Perfect. And with that, all the images are the same height because we specified the height. And this is the first customization option you have. If you want your images not to be as high, for example, 300. Then you have your image gallery only with 300. The images are always being centered more or less. And for example, 400 looks like this, but it's always the same height. Another thing I changed, I didn't like the small edges here. So we go into the styles and there we can say card. That's the card class. And we say border radius, which is the setting or the property that does this, px, and we have to override the defaults or important. We save this. And then we also have to say, and this is what I missed at first, because yes, we have defined the radius, but the image is still being drawn by the browser. So what we have to say is we have to say overflow hidden. And with that, we get the desired appearance of our images. Nice, huh? All the same height, and we have full responsive behavior. And the final part, what I added is the hover part. And that's a pseudo class in our repository here in the styles. Hover, it's called. And here you see Copilot already makes a suggestion that just take what Copilot suggests, save, and see, we have a nice shadow that is already showing that we're hovering. I honestly prepare what I did. So let's take this value or these values right here. It's a little bit more prominent, the shadow right there. So this is our web page with image hover. So that is what we can actually just import into our TMS WEB Core project and then generate dynamically to get the appearance of our image galleries. This opens up your web design skills to creating image galleries on demand in TMS WEB Core by generating these sort of grids. And of course, I'll show you how you can create this grid in code in TMS WEB Core.